Okay. Yeah, again. Yeah, it's Saturday. That's where Allie Mae will be. So my power is out randomly. It's a beautiful day here in central Ohio. It's gorgeous outside. It's like, I don't know, probably in the mid 60s, sunny, but there are some clouds. There's like a very little breeze. Gorgeous out. No, my power goes out. So I am running my generator. I hope you guys cannot hear it. Andrew said he can't. So let's just hope that that continues.
They couldn't hear me, actually. I don't know what happened, but I was muted for that opening again.
Again?
Again, I'll do it quick.
Again?
We have 300,
Oh.
3,804 days of illegal and arbitrary detention for Julian Assange, 767 days since the WikiLeaks founder was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison after being sold for a $4.2 billion loan to the nation of Ecuador from the IMF. We have 130 days since Vanessa Breitzer's January 6, 2021 ruling denying Julian Assange bail after personally ordering his release and ruling no extradition in his case. We have 1,429 days of federal incarceration for whistleblower Reality Winner for simply embarrassing the intelligence communities and proving that they are inept. We have 3,000 or 1,359 days of inhumane detention for the alleged Vault 7 whistleblower Joshua Schultz, who spent at least 942 of those days in special administrative measures. We have 765 days since the political persecution of Ola Bini started in Ecuador. The two pieces of good news, we have 7 weeks free, 70 days free for Jeremy Hammond, and we have 421 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning, who does stream on Twitch as always, and I'm glad everyone could hear me this time. How are you, Missy?
We are both having an equally awesome day, I think. I think maybe we should add Craig Murray to our list of bullshit.
Yes.
I think it's been 3 days since he was sentenced to 8 months in prison for doing journalism. Fucking just journalism. Just everyday journalism. And I think it's been 3 days.
Yep, 3 days since he's been sentenced to 8 months in prison.
Yes, he has underlying health conditions. He has a 2-month-old baby. And he just did journalism. That's it. Nothing special. I mean, no offense to Craig Murray. He does amazing journalism. Like, he's a brilliant writer, great researcher. You know, he's great journalist. But I'm just saying, like, it was just ordinary journalism, what he did. That all journalists do. He just happens to be better at doing it than most other people.
Which is why they went after him. And just to remind everyone, with the UK trying to put Craig, or putting him at this point, in jail for 8 months, It's going to prevent him from testifying against the CIA in the UC Global case in Spain in person. I'm assuming he'll still
Yes,
be allowed to make statements. There may be a video conference.
I would
I don't
hope
know.
so.
I don't know for sure on that. I haven't heard anything either
I
way.
would hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. If
So,
they don't, fam,
right. It's
if they don't let him, okay, that's going to have to get some people in the streets, I would think. Seriously. At that point, it
well, there's
becomes
already a
a very serious
hardcore
problem.
Scottish nationalist movement that
Mhm.
follows Craig Murray. Like, not that he's the leader of them, but looks to him for accurate information about the world that they
Information,
live in.
yes.
Yeah.
That's a
So,
great choice, people. I don't know anything about those issues really. I mean, I kind of like I have like a very surface level knowledge of what's happening. But yeah, he's a good one to follow. I think he's very you know, great at what he does. He is, and he should not be he shouldn't have even had to go through this. But then the fact that he actually did get sentenced to 8 months in prison is terrifying. It's just another blatant attack on just telling the truth. That's it.
right,
Just
and it's
like
not like Craig Murray's
reporting the
even just
truth.
a regular Joe beat reporter either. He's a foreign or a former fucking diplomat. Like, he's
And a
someone that
whistleblower.
represented the United Kingdom internationally.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's terrifying. And it's just, again, it's just getting worse. I don't even know what to say anymore at this point. I really don't. It's just getting worse.
So we had a question in chat before we jump into the next stuff, because I did want to talk about the billboards too. But, and I'll throw this one to you, Misty. How do they get away with this?
How did they get away with doing what they're doing to Julian and Craig and everybody?
Yeah.
They've been slow walking it. They've been slow walking this for decades. And really, I say this all the time. In the past 10 or 15 years, it's really ramped up. But they don't do it all at once. They have been chipping away at our rights. They're very smart. They know if they come in and they just take something away from you, you're going to protest about that. Like, what the fuck, man? You can't do that. But they don't do it that way. It's the same thing as why they started with Alex Jones when they wanted to start deplatforming people. You go, with the person either that you're not going to pay attention to at all, or you're going to go with the method of taking away a little piece of something or making it's manufacturing consent essentially. So they just start chipping away little bits, and then you end up here where there was just cops in, I'm going to say the wrong city probably, so I'm just not going to say, but the guy was waving a Palestinian flag at a protest, like not doing anything, just peacefully waving a flag, and he got arrested rather harshly. Like it's a whole thing, and there's been anti-protest laws that are in a multitude of states that are getting passed. There's the anti-BDS stuff, they're like teachers that have lost their jobs, so they can't criticize Israel. There's this whole attack on our ability to say things, to know things, to learn things, to read things, to watch things, to listen to things, and just ideas that they're, criminalizing ideas and thoughts and the expression of those ideas and thoughts. And it's fucked up and it's not okay.
It's terrifying. It is
It
absolutely
is.
horrifying.
Yeah. And it's like, people say, how do they get away with it? I honestly do not have the answer for that, because I know it's just because I'm paying attention, but at this point it feels like it's so obvious that I'm really surprised that more people don't give a fuck. But I mean, I also recognize that they're gift for propaganda and like controlling what people think and feel and what they pay attention to. I mean, it's not all that surprising, but I don't know. I have mixed emotions about it because I just think it's so obvious now.
So I dropped 2 links in the chat. The first one, please go to first and support Craig Murray. That's his fundraiser that he has out right now, and his article talking about it. For those of you who don't know, Craig Murray almost never asks for money. He's had a legal defense fund for this for over a year now. I think it's been almost 18 months. And anytime he writes an article, he always puts, his like donate links and stuff, but he always says donate to Julian first. So This is the one time where he still included that in there, but Craig Murray definitely needs some help. He said that they need about, I want to say it's like 20 to 40,000 pounds still, just for the portions that they've accrued. That's not counting like the appeals process and all that. But that article that I put in there is something we covered a while ago that talks all about.
We should check into what his fines are going to be too, because now that he's been sentenced, we should be able to. I mean, it obviously depends on appeal because he does still have the opportunity, and he is appealing. But we can also probably get kind of an idea of what his fines will end up being, at least approximately, and we should start trying to work on that as well. Because I mean, if we can pay off Chelsea's fines, which I'm not even kidding, that moment in time. I needed that. Like how quickly that went made me so happy. I couldn't even stand it. It was like, I don't know if you followed me on Twitter, you'll know that like I was live tweeting that shit. Like we're at 32,712. I was live tweeting that shit because it went so fast.
Yeah, the internet raised Chelsea over $250,000 in under 48 hours.
Her fines were paid off. Boom.
Yeah,
done.
And then raised another 40 to 50 million or thousand
to get her started.
40 to 50,000.
We should be able to do that for Craig Murray too. It won't be as much as that, I don't think. I hope not. Jesus.
Well, I don't even know if there is a fine associated with it. I'd have to check because I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We should, because if he's gonna have fines, let's take that stress off of him and let him know that he doesn't have. That's one thing he doesn't have to worry about, because these are people like that. This is where solidarity comes in. This is when somebody is doing us a service, and we should help that person if we can when they really need it. He's one of those people, you know. So, whistleblower, journalist, you know, just one of the good ones. So yeah, I just think that would be just. I can't imagine having a 2-month-old baby, and then you have to go to prison for 8 months. Or 8 months.
Yeah, it's damn near the first year of their life. That's fucking insane.
Yeah.
And just like Julian's, Craig Murray's prosecution's a warning. Like, if you try to testify against the CIA, they will stitch you up in whatever fucking country you're in. So I appreciate him having balls of steel to stand up, because we need more people like him in the positions that he's in, but also the positions that he's come from. But
100%.
I did want to talk about the billboards, because those are fucking awesome.
Yeah.
I'm
always down to talk about billboards.
This was a you thing.
No, it's a we thing. Come on.
$5,378. I'm not going to throw it on the screen share, but I'll put it up for everyone in the chat to see.
Okay, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and. But here, let me ask you guys this: should I pay to get 2 more somewhere, or should I just pay to extend the 3 we already have? I think there's one I might for switch up, because I think that there's another location that might be a little bit better. But the other 2 are pretty solid. Like the average view counts, you know, like the ones 175 over 170,000 estimated views per week or whatever. The other ones like 90 something. I think those were like some of the 2 highest. So
and that just goes to show, because that's something they can't censor. I mean, there are ways and means that they could censor it, but signs in person in the streets are things that they can either go and physically take down or deal with until they're gone. And while we can be censored on social media, we can have these tech oligarchs and globalists that de-rank posts, demonetize channels, remove content. It takes a physical person to go and take a sign down. And especially a billboard, that's not coming down without either that time expiring or some dramatic event around it. So I think that's like getting 170,000 people a week to see that's fucking powerful.
Yeah, that one's in downtown Columbus. I think that view count may even be low, because there's a lot of buildings around there that people work in every day. And so I don't know how many people come in and out of those buildings as visitors or as delivery people or whatever. And how many people, you know what I mean? So that's a lot of people in there. So I really like that location, but adding 2 more, I don't know. I guess I just need to do the math, and I hate math. I might make my husband do it because I hate math. Trying to figure out the best way to go. It's all very stressful, you know, like I want to get the best bang for our buck, and it's stressful. Yeah, but the billboards are great. I still haven't had time this week to go drive by them yet, because this week's been fucking crazy. But I might be able to go. I might be able to go tonight or maybe Monday. But this week seriously has been incredibly intense. There's been a lot of shit going on. Yeah, but the billboards are great. So if you guys can continue to share that link, That would be cool. I would love to keep these going. If you guys want them in different locations, that's fine too. But I would just love to keep billboards out because, like Andrew said, they can't censor that. So, well, they can. They probably will at some point once they figure us out.
Eventually, they'll ask you for some kind of like, hey, well, we need to make sure you're incorporated properly, and then
Right.
that's always usually
well,
the
we could probably do that through. I'm sure like one of the Assange groups is legit. Come at me, bro. We'll fix it. We'll fix it somehow. Yeah. But there's still ways. They'll find a way. You know,
So
they'll find a way eventually.
I'm not going to play these, but I have 2 audio pieces that came out recently. One of them just came out today, I believe. It's Julian Assange's half-brother Gabriel speaking up about him. I'm going to drop these in chat. It's not something that we're probably going to clip out or show on the Vigils, just because they're audio-only pieces. But it's absolutely worth listening to. Again, this first one is Julian's brother speaking up on World Press Freedom Day. And then I have
They're coming to the States soon, fam.
What?
They're coming to the States soon. So everybody get ready for that. End of the month or like next month sometime-ish. So we need to get some events going, get some support brewed up. I think there's going to be a stop in Kentucky. Ohio, I don't know like where all. Ohio, maybe Chicago, New York, probably. So, yeah, we definitely need to get some events going. They're going to be in Columbus, I think, which would be dope. We can. Allie!
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Sorry.
No, you're
How
fine.
you going?
How are you?
I'm okay. I'm in another mysterious location.
Those are the best.
It's a Cuban sandwich shop.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're like
Carmen
like
Sandiego.
Yeah.
In the Latin American region of London. And the suburb is actually called Elephant and Castle. And they make really good sandwich as well. So I had to get off the bus so I could call you guys and say hi.
Yes.
So I get off at the Cuban sandwich shop. You know, it's not Cuban. It's
so great.
So how did everything go today, Allie? How was the stuff at Piccadilly? You guys were at Piccadilly again, right?
We went to Piccadilly, but a lot of us went to the Palestine from Marble Arch to 100,000. Others went to the anti-lockdown, which was in Hyde Park. Palestine, you know, solidarity. Unfortunately, I quit before I went, so I went to March, but it doesn't matter. I'll be back. Yeah, but it was really, you know, everyone was live. So then, of course, because there were so many people in the Assange rally at Piccadilly was mega big. So it was very good. Is my sound okay? I've got to bring my headphones.
Yeah, you're coming in and out a little bit, but it's not terrible.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little. It's not. It's not terrible. It's just every couple.
I am glad to hear though that the UK has a better anti-war coalition made than the US, because there have been some protests across the US of the Israel-Palestine situation. A slaughter would be the right term.
There's supposed to be a lot today.
Yeah. But we haven't had
We'll
much.
see.
We don't have much in the way of large anti-war groups or people willing to turn out unsolicited for things like that. So knowing that there was that many people in the UK is super exciting.
Oh, that's I saw one from Chicago that was quite big.
Yeah, Chicago was pretty big.
Yeah. But they've actually been a lot in all of the Birmingham, Manchester, a lot. Jeremy Corbyn came out for the one that was here, which, you know, I did a speech and you know, I don't know how you guys are feeling, but, you know, it's been a long time to be in this sort of fragile state of not knowing what the hell they're going to do to us next, if you know what I mean. And I think everyone's sort of getting to the point of just being over it. And but the other day, the government announced here informally on a morning TV chat show, the health minister said, well, we probably won't let you out, be able to let you go on holidays in June or something. So you know how governments do this messaging. And then people adjusted to that, and then all of a sudden they removed privileges, more they've sent the messages out. I don't think people are going to be understanding.
Would you mind popping your headphones in, Ali? You're kind of cutting in and out on us.
Oh, sorry, I don't. I have forgotten to bring them. Do you think I should?
Oh no, you're fine. I just wanted to. It just sounded like the signal was getting kind of weak at some points. That's all.
Maybe I should turn my camera off.
That would be fine too.
Yeah, I'll turn my camera off.
But
and I'll just talk straight into the
that
mic.
sounds
Is
much
that better?
better. Could you talk about that
Yeah,
again? Just everything you were saying about the state of the lockdowns in the UK?
Well, everyone is really sort of expecting to come out of lockdown and to be able to go on a summer holiday in June, mid-June. But the other day, on Friday, the health minister went on a morning TV show and said that all we want people to be able to go out on holiday, to go on lavish holidays. That's what he said. He used the word lavish. So, British people, what they do is they do sometimes they go to Spain to go to a place like, all of the resorts in Spain and Portugal and places like that. Now, of course, because they brought in this vaccination ID passport scam, and they want to do it and they want to get people vaxxed because they've got all these vaccinations that are going off and they need people to take them before the use by date runs out because they bought them and they want to overseas, so that.
So do you think part of restricting all that movement is to stop people from seeing what unlockdown countries look like over in the EU, but also not wanting people to see that other countries have thousands of people out protesting lockdowns too?
I'm not sure about that. I think it's more about wrecking the economy as much as they can and keeping people locked down. I think it's more about the ID passport and the whole, the big reset that they want to do. They seem very, very keen on making the passport a big deal here. They keep denying that they're going to do it, but of course they're going to do it. And of course they are, because denial, nowadays we accept that ministers denying something means the opposite. It's opposites, isn't it? It's the Orwellian opposites, situation. So they really have to get people vaccinated or give that messaging. And so you can't go anywhere because they're doing it on the premise of the Indian variant, which they've called variant. I can't remember the letters and the numbers, S16547.2, something like that. Instead of, they don't want to be racist and call it the Indian variant, they called it this code name. And saying it's really, really, serious and all of that, which it isn't, and we know it, and the scientists have said it's not. But they're hoodwinking people again. So I think
they
it's more
found a
about
new
that.
level of control. They found a new level of boot to the neck that people are willing, at least on a large scale, to accept, where there's the anti-lockdown protests and all that, but overall people still are just going on with their lives. And in the UK it's absolutely horrifying because you guys aren't even allowed out of your house more than once a day currently, are you?
Where the people are allowed out and you're allowed to go out and exercise, and they have rules. It's kind of like you wear a mask on the train or the bus and in shops, but you can be exempt from wearing a mask if you have breathing difficulty. So there's no kind of pass that you can get from a doctor to say that. You just say, no, I'm exempt, and so you don't wear a mask. But people are just so sheepy that they don't even think I could easily be exempt, but because they want to conform to this, these rules that they've been given. So I really think, Andrew, that it's about hybrid warfare that they're doing on us, and I mean, let's face it, look at the money and the relationship between the UK and Israel for actual war. The UK ministers have had so many secretive meetings with Israel. Priti Patel, the Home Office minister, she went on secret meetings in Israel, and she got demoted by Theresa May, but now she's back in the cabinet. And why was she going over there? They are doing all of these deals. They're selling arms to Israel. They have relationships. They do war exercises with them, both naval and ground exercises. They are linked by the cyber spy network, intelligence network. They're hoodwinking people, and they're actually performing war in Israel. It's not just the Israelis who are doing the war. They're backed by the US and the UK and the allies, and they're doing hybrid war on us. The vaccine pass, the vaccines, the epic pandemic, stay in your home. It's a form of hybrid warfare, us. So we're all in a state of war. I think, in a way, when obviously we're not getting bombed, etc. But it's warfare. It's a type of warfare, that they're putting on us.
And in New York, so there are some places here in the States that require vaccine passports. The biggest example is New York City with their Excelsior pass that they're trying to shove out, or has already been shoved out. But literally, it's IBM's categorization. Like, IBM's the one that keeps track of all this information. And IBM, for those who don't know, was the same company that literally categorized the Jews for the Nazis while they were in concentration camps. They gave them their number systems to track them. And that's the same company that now is going to be running the passports for all of us, while Palantir has everyone's private health data at their disposal to sell. Like, it's crazy.
It is crazy. They did the punch cards, didn't they? The early IBM punch cards, the early computer punch cards, they did that in the concentration camps. Yes, they did. And let's face it, it all comes back to Epstein in some way or other. I fell asleep last night. I know that sounds bizarre to say, but let me make the point, because, that was an op, for Mossad, and Ehud Barak was in there. There was Sheldon Adelson money, there was, you name it, Leslie Wexner, and all of those people, in this big intel op, to trap world leaders, and those world leaders went around and made all of these arms deals with Israel, with Colombia, Remember when Joe Biden, gave $10 billion, thank you, to the Colombian, narco military state to bomb their citizens, back 20 years ago. $10 billion a day plus Apache helicopters. I think there were Apache or some kind of helicopters. Yesterday we had a 17-year-old girl who was raped by, the military soldiers there in Colombia, and committed suicide. They're at war there. They're at war with their people there, funded by the US and their allies. Look at Saudi Arabia and the starving people in Yemen. As the relationship between the UK and Saudi Arabia is like, they fund the military there, and same for Israel. The UK funds the missiles and the weaponry there, and they have the Friends of Israel have invaded the politics in the UK. They got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, because you can't have no war. So it's hybrid warfare with every single damn country. And, of course, they're not going to come out and make any, if anything, a bland statement in support of Palestine, but they're not, because they deliberately wanted the end of wars, So we made speeches to this effect today at the rally for Julian, because it is all about the techno health military state, isn't it, now? Hybrid warfare envelops us, with our taxes going to fund these wars, and with them using the technocracy on us for these health passports and these pandemics that they're going to pump out every so often, and keep people hooked up that way. So I think it's come to, people need to come to the realization they are part of this endless war, even if the war's not in their country. And,
Yes, of course. I mean, people in the what the Palestinians are going through is what people in Colombia are going to. It's directly related to our bullshit. It is directly related to our bullshit, and it's on us. Like, we have to stop, being completely shut down to this shit and wake up to what's actually happening. This is funded by you. This is done with consent by, silence is complicity. I mean, if you're not going to say anything, you're complicit in what's happening. And we have, this is not an okay way to run a country, or, you know what I mean? It's not. It's ridiculous. This is ridiculous.
It was the Black Hawk helicopters in Colombia that I was trying to think of the name of. It wasn't Apache, it was Black Hawk helicopters. They went over there, gave them to security forces, and they used to murder their own civilians. And the CIA trained the Colombian army to protect the oil pipelines. Yeah, they displaced millions of Colombians. There's a lot over here. They're in the Assange network here because they know what was done to them. Had to flee in their millions from Colombia when Biden did this. It all comes home. It's all coming home to roost with everyone everywhere because, these displaced peoples that wars were started in their countries, or, unrest was started, civil wars, end up somewhere else. Yeah. And they know what it's like to be, oppressed and targeted in that way. We've got a guy in our group who was thrown out of a plane and shot and left for dead by the military over there, They're one of the strongest supporters here, and of course a lot of Ecuadorians in the group as well. So
this really is a global fight against empire. Yeah, it's a global fight against empire. We need to come together, and it's nice to see the solidarity that comes together too. I mean, you see people in Yemen, marching in solidarity with Palestine. Two of the most oppressed countries on earth are standing together for each other. And that's what we need. I mean, that's exactly what we need. The way that the Black Lives, I don't know if you really want to still call it the Black Lives Matter movement, because the national organization has been very obviously co-opted. I guess the movement is still the same. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but so there's always been a solidarity with the Palestinian movement. There's, I feel like it's starting. Oppressed people around the world are starting to realize that they can come together. And I think that that's great. I think that's why they're working so hard to shut down means of communication between us.
Of course. Now, that's a really good point, Misty, because what they have now announced here is this online harms a white paper. So it's in a paper form, the paper before they do the legislation, and then it'll get passed, eventually. But they're calling it online harms, and of course, saying that it's to protect children online. But what it is to shut down alt media, podcasting, everything. So it's an $18 million fine to anything that could be considered harmful. Okay. Yeah. And there's no definition of what's harmful. Okay. So that in the UK, the government has heavily paid off all the media here. They've spent 320 million from, I think, the early this year to go into 2022 to do the BS pandemic advertising. So they've basically bought all of the media. Those newspapers and everything that were going bust, they're not going bust anymore, but they can't say anything against the narrative because they're being paid by the government. They're totally captured.
So in the UK, you guys, not you, obviously, Ali, but the United Kingdom passed a law that says our police officers are allowed to rape and traffic children for the benefit of the United Kingdom.
Yes.
But if you post anything online about police officers raping and trafficking children, it's going to get removed, is essentially what that law is saying. Exactly.
They're tying in the last little bit, this last little drawstring will be done with this online harms to shut every single bit of news off from people, alt media news off, yeah? And it's basically, I suppose, it's the equivalent of shutting down the internet, really, isn't it? Because, where do we get our media from then, And they've also, they craftily took the Genocide Act out of their legislation, made it ineffective so that that Tony Blair couldn't be tried, for genocide, for crimes of genocide. There's loopholes there. The only way that we can ever get him tried, which we want to, is for a personal criminal, civil criminal case. For citizens doing it, and he's been citizens arrested 5 times.
Oh.
5 times they've tried to arrest Tony Blair for the illegal war, in Iraq. So they're just tying up it's just ridiculous ridiculous that people do not see what's happening because the media is not telling them. And the last thing's going to be, the last bastion for finding out about what's going on will be to make all sort of anything that's harmful, they can deem harmful content, illegal as well, or subject to an £18 million fine. And that's pounds, it's not dollars. So I think that's more like $30,000. I'm not sure. But yeah, so it's getting really bad. But no one will know about it because the media won't report it because they're captured. You know, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare when you think about it, you know. I don't I just like constantly shake my head. People just look at you. You're in the street, stop telling people this on the street, you know, with the megaphone. People are looking at you like you're crazy, you know. I saw some little kids turn around when I said the UK police are licensed to rape and torture. They went, what? And they looked at their parents, and I thought, I hope those damn parents look up that on the internet when they go home because it's damn well true, you know?
It's freaking sad that someone could live in that country and not understand what's happening with the law right now. Like, I get that the US is just as bad and there's just as many ignorant people. Ignorant in the sense of they aren't exposed to this information due to propaganda, so there's probably a better word. But it's just crazy that people are able to compartmentalize so much that they think like, oh, my government's doing this to its population. I'm going to go live my life and only exercise once a day.
Yeah, it's really hard to fathom. I just don't get, it's a mind fuck. It's like a continual mind fuck, isn't it? You've got to hang around with people who are like-minded, otherwise you'd go flipping crazy. But I think everything with the lockdown and everything, it's just making people really crazy. Everyone seems to be going through a difficult period at the moment, with just coping with normal life, you know. And what do you do? You know, you can only fight or flee, or maybe do both. You know, a bit of both.
So, can I ask you about something weird? Because there was a news story I ran into. I follow a couple different like local London sources, and you guys have these things called low traffic areas or like LTNs. Like, could you talk about those a little bit? I know it's completely off topic, but it's
Well, I can tell you that I've had some experience of it because when we had the Old Bailey trial, I had to take all of the banners and the placards and tables and chairs and different other like food and equipment and stuff into the Old Bailey to the side of the street. So I had to take my car. But because I'm from Australia and I don't really know the local, ways to get around things, and I'm also a bit averse to using Google Maps to skirt round these areas, it's called a emission zone. Okay, so only vehicles with low emissions, like a smart car or something like that, or one with a very, very tiny motor, like lawnmower type motor, can go into the central business district where the Old Bailey is without paying a fine. Okay, so the fine is £17.50 a day. You can rig it up to your card, a debit card or a credit card. So they'll automatically deduct it. When they see your number plate, they'll automatically deduct this amount. But I wasn't smart to it. And I started getting these bills. In the end, it was like thousands and thousands of pounds, the bills I got for taking the car, driving through the emission zone every day for 4 weeks. And I was just like, oh my God. So yeah, what they're doing now is, it's crazy, Andrew. To drive here or anything is absolutely crazy. So because of the Green New Deal and the Great Reset, they have dug up all of the roads. They're putting all these 5G and cables or whatever they're doing, but also making all of these bike lanes. So the streets are very, very, you'd imagine, only fit for a horse and carriage. And now sort of like barely two cars can pass one another. And then they've carved off a side piece of it for the bike people, for the bike lanes. So there's hardly any road to drive on. Roads can be either bus or bike lanes only. You could turn into a road and not see that it's a bike or bus lane and then get fined. I got fined £130 the other day for going in a bus lane where I had to turn left anyway, but you had to momentarily go into a bus lane. So, like every single place you drive. So this ULEZ, ultra low emission zone, ULEZ, ULEZ, is going to be increased to another circle. And they have these rings around the CBD, and then they're doing another ring. So by September, I think you'll have to pay, even if you live out in a little bit further out of town, to drive a car. You won't be able to drive a car. There'll be no cars. Where the Australian Embassy is, or the Australian High Commission, where we do every Wednesday, they have carved up half of the road and they've put these sort of plaza-style sort of tiles down on the street. So they want people sitting out in a kind of like a smart city zone. If you've seen the plans for those smart cities, you know, it's all paving stones and a few odd trees here or there, pretending that it's people out enjoying themselves in the open air space in a smart city, and there might be one little bush or a tree on those plans. Yeah, they've carved up all the road there, taken it all away for these plazas. Mate, this is going to be smart city. This is smart city. The Great Reset, the Green New Deal, and all of that bullshit. The whole of London, it's going to be a nightmare. People will come, they'll do another lockdown to complete it. This is part of it, you know, why they're going to do another one. Keep people locked down for a couple of years, because when they finally get out, it'll just be all smart city and there'll be no point going anywhere. Yeah?
Yeah. They got to get people used to it.
Yeah. So I sort of trapped here because you can't go back to Australia because they're crazy over there as well. There's 200,000 people on a list of people wanting to return from overseas to Australia, but they have had basically no COVID. But the fear mongering has been so great that the Prime Minister did a dog whistle. I don't know, you probably may not remember, back in the Iraq war days, there was a Prime Minister of Australia called John Howard, and he was the one that got into the illegal war with Bush and Blair. Okay? He was a little guy, little ugly guy, he was an accountant. And anyway, he did this dog whistle to make the racist elements in Australian politics come out, right? And he said that refugees who were taking boats, you know, they were literally getting in boats and coming from Indonesia, like from other places like Myanmar, and, you know, fleeing war zones and bad, civil wars and things like that. Then via Indonesia, where they were getting these people traffickers to bring them on boats to Australia. So this Prime Minister, John Howard, the warmonger, the war criminal, Bush and Blair, the war criminal, he said that these people were throwing their children overboard so they'd be rescued by the Navy. It was a lie, another lie. But it made people think, oh, these horrible Muslim people or whatever, you know, throwing their children into the sea so they can be rescued and brought to Australia, you know, and it was racist dog whistling. Well, now, fast forward to the present moment, they're doing the racist dog whistling about Indian people having COVID and the Australians that are over there, because Australia has a big population of Indians, you know, of Indian heritage that go over to visit their family. And they are doing the racist dog whistling again. So they're not letting they instituted this fine. He said, the Prime Minister, people coming back from India to Australia, Australian citizens of Indian heritage, $5,000 fine if you come back from India. So just stay wherever the hell you are, because we don't want you. And there is a list of 200,000 Australians from everywhere, all sorts of descent. I was actually from, like, my grandmother was part Scottish or something, but, you know, I was actually born in Australia. There's 200,000 of us from all different areas in all different countries who can't get back to Australia because the Australian government is not allowing virtually anyone to go back there, because they've set up very few quarantine centres and because they've dog whistled to the population to keep us out. We don't want COVID. Let them stay wherever the fuck they are.
That's fucked up.
That's horrifying.
It is really fucked up. I mean, I applied for you can get a loan through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, and to stay in the really bad prison quarantine centres over there. It's $3,000 to go there, and at the moment, it looks like a flight. Last time I looked, I mean, I actually was only half thinking of going because, you know, like, I sort of, things are problems and stuff like that over here. But anyway, but also I wanted to stay and fight for Assange, so I was sort of half thinking that. So I only did it as an exercise, filled out the forms, and they wrote back to me and said, oh, you didn't give enough information about your previous job. My previous job was here working in the UK, cash in hand for a guy who had a birth defect, so that he couldn't operate his hands. So I was pressing the buttons on his computer, etc. for him, and just getting paid cash in hand to pay the rent. Yeah? And that wasn't they want sort of a form and official thing in order to be able to qualify as an Australian for the loan. So we're going to loan you to get back to Australia after having been here for 2 years, like trapped here for the last year because, you know, for various reasons. I broke my foot at the start of the COVID crisis because a lady made me wear slippers and I slipped down the stairs, COVID like indoor slippers, you know, because she was scared at the time. And so I slipped down the stairs in the COVID slippers and got a broken foot. And then I didn't go back to Australia because I thought, oh, this is going to be a nightmare with masks and bullshit on a plane with a broken foot and blah, blah, blah. And then it got worse. You just couldn't go. In the end, I just couldn't go. So but there's 200 that they try and take you off the list. So I applied for the loan. They wrote back to me and said, you haven't given enough information about your employment status, blah, 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 how you lost the last job. So boom, you're off the list. And that's how they're maintaining the list they claim is 30,000, but it's 200,000 people.
Jesus.
Imagine it. You're trapped in an overseas country. You haven't got a visa to work or a right to work. You've maybe lost your job because of COVID or something like that. You've got no source of income. Your government isn't paying you the unemployment benefit or what you would get if you were at home with no job. And the country that you're in wouldn't pay it to you either because you've got no right to, you know, recourse to funds or anything. There's 200,000 people because of these stupid governments, you know, like this stupid racist government, basically. Racist.
Yeah.
Racist is what I think. Because it's exactly the same as what that warmonger, war criminal John Howard, the Prime Minister, who was the Prime Minister with Blair and Bush, same time when they did the illegal war, it was the same. He said they threw their children overboard and they didn't. The people didn't, but it made Australians, didn't want Muslims or didn't want, people to come as refugees. That's all calmed down, and here we are 20 years later, and they're doing it again. And the population is sucking it up like idiots.
I love how governments will use ideas and imagery of children being hurt fakely. Like you had the incubator babies in the first Iraq war. You have they're throwing children off their boat to get rescued by the Navy. But at the same time, we live in a world where you can go on any social media platform and see images of the children in Yemen, literally starving to death, being bombed, getting pulled out of rubble. But somehow those images don't move people to action. It's only when it's like racist connotations or a pro-US war that people even begin to care about the actual costs.
Yes. And, I really think that that's why I was talking about that online harms bill, because the stories that Declassified UK have been doing, Matt Kennard, Mark Curtis, all about the Middle East conflicts, the inside story about how much the UK government gives to the Saudis to starve people in Yemen, and, in terms of armaments and all of that business, that they are actually literally, the UK people are funding that through their taxes, the starvation of those Yemeni children and those people. And we need to find a way to sort of get it through people's heads. Because
the United States sends Israel $10 million a day. $10 million every single day. It's like $3.8 billion or so. I don't even know. It's a ridiculous amount of money. And they're using that to use experimental weaponry on Palestinian people so that they can call them battle tested when they sell them to the rest of the globe.
Exactly.
And
same as here with Elbit,
disgusting.
They do it as well. They test their weapons there. And they're coming from, we had the protests.
It's like a little military laboratory there. They just test all their weapons on.
That's it. It's just insane that's what they actually advertise their weapons at game shows. They have these fairs, the war fairs, what do they call them? The game shows. Over here they call it a game show, but it's like a fair, a weapons trade fair, trade fair.
Oh, yeah.
A war fair.
So when, and when those weapons are advertised there, they're advertised as tested out. They work because we tested them in Palestine, on people,
on Palestinian women and children. Basically.
That's right. That's how they advertise them at the fairs. It is incredible to think, that and it makes me angry because these people are laughing at us. And they must be laughing at us in there having their cocktails now, shagging each other or whatever the flip they're doing. I mean, let's face it, Andrew and Misty, the other day apparently on BBC TV, how they on Monday you won't wear a mask on Monday. Next Monday you won't have to wear your mask everywhere, and they showed people how they can hug safely. They literally had a news story about how you could hug safely. I didn't actually see the lot, but the description of it was kind of like more on the side or something with your head sort of apart or something like that, you know.
Social
And
distance
like,
hugging,
so,
like you just touch hands.
You like touch fingertips.
That's how dumb people are, that they think they are, and they think or they think they are, you know. So of course they're traveling to the Bahamas, shagging each other, hugging each other, going to restaurants like Gavin Newsom. I mean, you know, of course they're doing all of this stuff, you know. But when I going back to Saudi Arabia, you know, there's great friends with America and the Bushes and, you know, the old Papa Bush and the young Bush. You know, the Saudi relationship there is just like, you know, so strong. Same with the UK. You know, they do a lot of deals there, you know, and they must be just fucking laughing their guts out at us, you know. Poor peasants, you know. I really think that it was going to take people to get actual very, very poor before.
Well, they've gotten really brazen about it. Like they're just out in the open fucking us over. Like in the United States, they had the CARES Act. The fucking CARES Act was a complete devastation of the working class. Forget the lower classes. I mean, oh my God, you guys, we're in for it. We're not even going to start feeling that until, you know, for a while. We're already feeling it now, but it's not even close to fully borne out yet. And nobody says anything. Progressives voted for that shit, and nobody pays attention. Nobody's, you know, like some of us are giving them shit about it, but Jesus Christ, we're letting them, like we're handing over everything to them willingly. We're just shoveling it to them. You know, they tell us that they have our best interests at heart, and we trust these ridiculous psychopaths, and we let them run shit, and they're just taking everything from us hand over fist.
That's
I mean,
why
everything.
I said it must. That's why I said it's got to all come back to Epstein, because you know, like Epstein, because you know how you know how did they capture them all so well, you know, Ehud Barak and all of them. I mean, you know, the other thing that's been happening here, of course, that we you know is Craig Murray, and that has been worrying us over here. And I mean, as soon as I don't know if you did the listening to the court drama there, did you guys do the phone in?
We did not phone in, no.
No. Well, I can understand that because the time difference. I got the time difference to this wrong, so I was thinking it was.
No, I think I'm like 5 hours behind you or something.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, you know, you obviously heard the result, 8 months jail.
Mm-hmm.
It was really chilling, Misty and Andrew, to hear that lady Dorian, who was the woman there on the bench. Her attitude, the absolute vitriol in her voice, the way that she tried to make out that Craig was even remotely comparable to Tommy Robinson, you know, who you probably know as an English Defence League, you know, white supremacist type. You know, he was with, you know, the UKIP type person, the person who's, you know, the white nation type person, you know, leading it. Because basically what he did was she was comparing the contempt of court cases of both Craig to Tommy Robinson. His real name is Ian Yaxley Lennon. But he goes by this name as Tommy Robinson, and he's a good old boy, like your Patriot boys over there, the Proud Boys, you know. And he led this band of men over here in opposition to, there was a grooming gang, okay? So it was a grooming gang in a densely populated Muslim area where white girls were being trafficked to the guys. And the police were involved. They covered it up for so long. It was a huge thing. Finally, a woman who was a detective managed to get it put through, and the people were tried. But there was resistance from the authorities because they didn't want it to seem like they were racist because they were trying Muslim guys. It was a Pakistani sort of group that were grooming these 13-year-old girls from orphanages and different, you know, walks of life. So were they giving drugs, getting them addicted, and then prosecuting basically, but they weren't getting paid. They were just getting drugs. Anyway, finally they came to court. Tommy Robinson got done for contempt of court. because he live streamed from outside the court in Leeds, but then outside the Old Bailey as well, because he got a sentence of 9 months. He was in jail for 2 months and won an appeal, got out, and then the Attorney General took him back to retry it, and he ended up getting 19 weeks in prison. He live streamed outside the actual court case of these people who were being tried and incited a crowd to bash one of the guys up, the defendants in the Greening game. Okay? Now, that is a contempt of court. Yeah? That is like a huge contempt of court case. This criminal, like, aggression, violence, blah, blah, blah. She compared Craig Murray to this guy. And this guy got 2 months in jail in the end. He got 2 months. Craig's got 8 months. And the same judge, the same court is going to be hearing Craig's appeal. And as you probably know, Taylor Hudak did a scoop saying that the Lady Dorian, that lady, the judge, she has a vested interest because she wants to set up a secret court in Scotland for rape victims where it's all anonymous and it's tried by judges. All of the evidence is secret and tried anonymously and by video, and there's no public, no jury, no nothing. So
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
So that's her
that
interest.
there's a judge willing to subvert literal journalism trying to get her own private court set up. That's crazy.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And if you look at actors in Munich and Taylor's story, she was the one that broke that. It's psycho. What's happening in the courts in every arm of government is absolute psychopathy, absolute power and greed psychopathy, because the women supposedly or they claim because, anything you wouldn't. And there was papers, there's a journalist, Darren Valley, who did more than Craig did. And she wasn't tried. But if you look at it, it's just trying to get to Craig. It's just trying to get to Craig, and it's also that Scotland is full of this LGBTQI type of agenda. There's a lot of lesbian judges, and nothing that have got anything that judge get me wrong, freedom for everybody, right? But what they're doing is they're doing all this virtue system and to their own sort of benefit. You know what I mean? Like, because you can put on that mask or self-identify as this or that, and then have automatic acceptance in all areas of society, and they are using that. The establishment is using that as a way of getting more power, because there's sort of an automatic kind of triggering right there when you say something like identify this or that. So it is psychopathy. They're actually psycho. They're really, really psycho. It sounds ridiculous to say that, but it's
not. I mean, it's not. Everything that we've seen in the world literally proves that these people are psychopaths. Like the fact that even on World Press Freedom Day, we had people from the UK, people from the US going all over the world talking about how important fucking press freedom is.
It's like the foundation of democracy.
There's one journalist that asked the White House a couple days later, like, hey, what about Julian Assange? And she was like, well...
One time that Julian Assange's name has been spoken in the White House press room. One time in the 2 years that he has been in Belmarsh. That's crazy. That right there should tell you like a huge amount of how screwed we all are. Because that's the fact that it took over 2 years and it's still only one guy, and he couldn't have asked like a weaker question and a weaker voice. I mean, I'm glad he did it, but Jesus Christ, are you kidding me? Like, okay, seal's broken. Now we need like a whole bunch of those assholes to start talking about Julian Assange, because I don't know if they notice this is coming for them too. This is coming for them too.
Yeah, good on that guy. He was stuttery.
Yes, finally.
It did take a long time to get there, and he had a mask on, so it was hard to hear what he was saying, really. But Jen Psaki did put it back on the Department of Justice, didn't she? That's
And
what
her
she
stupid smirk, her stupid little smirk.
Mm.
She's so smug. Ugh.
Annoying.
Well,
Ugh.
talking about Biden putting it
Um,
back on the Department of Justice is something that we've talked about since Trump gave power to Biden, and or even
Yeah,
before that when the election was coming to an end. And it
yeah,
wasn't that Biden would even have to do anything in Julian's case, which would be the worst thing he could possibly do, because he'll just say, well, this process is already in motion. I can't interfere
Yeah.
with an ongoing court trial.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
but
literally what that bitch said on stage. She was just like,
Mm-hmm.
no, you can't
yeah.
do it. Sorry. It's
It's
DOJ's
So
it's in
that's
the
problem.
court's hands now. That's why I said that when the election was happening. I'm like, this is exactly what he's going to do. It's
yeah.
exactly what he's going to do. He's going to say, "Oh, well, it's already in the courts now. I just got to let it play out." I mean, it's
It
Obama. I got to
speaks.
let it play out.
It speaks to the real people who are in power had control over it all the time, the whole
Mm-hmm.
time, like the deep state, doesn't it? Because
It,
even though the messaging was, oh, Obama couldn't do it because of the New York Times problem, he wouldn't institute it. They nevertheless captured Julian for all of those years until Trump did the job for them, you know? So
Obama
I don't
manufactured his right amount of consent. Like he did just enough. He
exactly.
went after more journalists than all other presidents combined before then with the Espionage Act. So
I
he
don't
did
see
his
any.
part, but we weren't that they hadn't really manufactured enough consent yet for us
Yeah,
to be okay with them going
yeah,
after Julian Assange in the way that they did. And then they made Trump do it
yeah.
because he's just kind of a bully, doesn't give a shit anyway, and he was kind
Trust
of
the
made out to be
Pompeo,
plane.
isn't it?
yeah.
It's Pompeo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, so that's the image that they gave of him, and so of course he's going to be the asshole that does it, and so they can put it off on him. Joe Biden can still wash his hands of it. I didn't do it; Trump did it, but he can also just kind of wash his hands from it and say, it's already in the courts now, so I have to let it play out. We have to
yeah.
let it go through the legal system, and then whatever happens, happens. And that's exactly how they managed to just wash their hands of it and put it on the guy that nobody likes anyway, and
I
it'll
like
just go away.
I like that people are tweeting the offices of the media complex in Israel, where in Palestine, where Al Jazeera's offices were. Um,
Hmm.
that's their idea of press freedom to bomb that. That people are
Yeah.
tweeting that.
No, and that's not the
that would
only
be
media
press
building
freedom.
they took out. They've taken out a
Yeah,
couple different media buildings, and are you
yeah,
kidding? That's so
yeah.
brazen. That is, and then you have social media, making sure that they censor all kinds of Palestinian journalists or just people who live in Palestine, who are living in Gaza. I mean, that all of those people have been silenced on social media. I mean, not all of them, but they're doing their level best to make sure that those voices are stifled in the very least, or at
Totally.
the very least. So
Yeah,
it's so clear what's going on. Israel wants to be able to take out Palestine, and by Palestine I mean the Palestinian people, because
yeah,
that's it.
yeah.
And they can do that if there's no media, if there's no coverage of it. And this is
That's
exactly
right.
what I've been trying to warn people. This is Julian Assange. They're taking away journalism, because then they can do whatever the fuck they want, and you won't even know. You won't
Right.
even know to be able to fight back. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Forget fighting
Totally.
back, which they're also making illegal by all these
Yeah,
anti-protest laws and all these, anti-free speech laws and all this shit that's going on.
yeah.
So not only will you not know about it, so you can't fight back, but then you just also can't fight back because they've made that illegal too.
Exactly. I mean, they've got
Ugh.
these new protest laws here that haven't actually, been through the last stage yet, but they will. They've obviously been passed, and they need the royal seal and blah blah. The date where they'll start. But under the old laws, where we got arrested, remember when we got arrested those times?
Mm-hmm.
Every single person who got arrested during that period up, the CPS Crown Prosecuting Service is not pursuing it because they were illegally arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Every single person. So we can actually get the people who were put in jail, like me and another girl were slung in jail for 6.5 at 7 hours, something. They actually have to compensate you for doing that because they're an illegal arrest.
Nice. Yeah, they should have to.
Yeah, of course.
But we have anti-protest
The
laws.
new ones.
Yeah, we have anti-protest laws here passing everywhere. I think there's maybe 31 that have passed in the past year or two. And then there are 71 still in some stage of development in the legislative process.
Yeah.
And they're popping up all over the place. In Ohio right now, we have 4. Andrew and I are both in Ohio. We have 4 just here alone. I think the last time we checked, I haven't looked at it recently, but Oklahoma did have 12. I haven't checked to see if any of them have passed or been shot down or anything yet since then. But yeah, it's everywhere.
To do with noise, because the big one here is if it's annoying, if you make an annoying noise.
Yeah,
this is the new one coming here. Too loud.
We had one in Kentucky where you could get arrested if you insulted a cop. Like if you just insulted a cop, you could get arrested. That's crazy.
The actual laws here in Ohio directly threaten the work that Misty and I do, because one of them that they're trying to pass is funding events, right? Like if you fund a riot or a social disturbance or any other vague term, you get classified essentially as a terrorist.
And the way that they word it is you can get in trouble if it's an event where there may be violence or whatever, or that could, cause, and of course it's a protest. Anything could happen at a protest. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. That's like the nature of what it is.
To make it happen.
Of course they could, but that's just, I mean, that is the nature of the beast. When you're in a political space and people are heated, stuff can go, of course. And Andrew's absolutely right. They could totally send somebody to start shit at your event. But even then, they don't even have to let you fund it, period, even to get that far, because all they can say is, nope, sorry, this is a political event. It could cause violence or whatever. And you're done before you even get started. And that's exactly what they're aiming to do. It's ridiculous. And they tried to do that after January 6th. A lot of the places were saying that they were no longer going to fund any like Trump related event. And then they were also saying that, well, maybe we just shouldn't allow funding for political events at all. I was worried actually, because we were, but that's when we were planning Clovers. And I was like, are we going to be able to fundraise for this? Because we, like, it was just right after January 6th. And all of a sudden, all these places are like, oh, well, we may not fund, political actions anymore because we don't. It's crazy. And it's a big tech's working with the government's working with big tech. Everybody's working together as a big happy fucking family while they pull in millions of dollars, take away your rights, and screw us over every day.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's exhausting.
It is exhausting. Are you exhausted? I'm just getting so exhausted. I didn't need to break my rib this morning. I was in the bath. It's ridiculous, I know, but I didn't even stand up. I just actually had a bath because I thought I'll have a nice bath and put all nice arnica healing salts and shit like that. Get yourself going, go to the palace right now. And I reached over. I was sitting down and I reached over too far and I slipped my rib on the side of the bath. And my underneath gave way a bit and the side of the bath hooked onto my ribs and kind of crash,
Oh, yeah.
Like a freaking rib. Like I feel like an old lady in the bath having an accident. But I was actually sitting down at the time. But it just made me think. And I sat in the bath and I just went, oh, you fuck, fuck. Because
it's always the dumbest things.
It was really sore, but also before that, I'd been thinking, I'm exhausted. I'm going to have a nice bath and do this and go there. And then I just went, and then the broken rib, I was just, oh, fuck. What is happening? But everyone, like I've had people ringing me from all around the world in states of, quite distress or, it's just like,
Stress.
Yeah, it's a long time to do this to people. So it's an unknown quantity of what's going to happen when they extend this lockdown and take more rights away. It's an unknown quantity, isn't it, what people are going to do,
It's
and
scary.
It is. And they've deliberately constructed this. They have deliberately constructed this for sort of actual domestic terrorism.
Well, the scariest part is that they've managed to convince people, like normal people, everyday, normal is a terrible word, but just everyday people that we're all each other's enemies. We don't even pay attention to them. So when stuff gets heated, it's like we're going to be mad at each other. They've constructed it so that we're going to be fighting amongst ourselves rather than dealing with the problem. It's exactly what's happening now. It's why we can't fix anything, and we just continue to let them convince us that our neighbors are the enemies, and that my neighbor wears like a $5,000, or my enemy wears like a $5,000 suit. You know what I'm saying? And sits in a boardroom. That's my enemy. I'm not worried about my neighbor at all. I may not like them. They may be terrible people, but I'm not worried about them. That's not my enemy. You know?
Yeah, exactly. We had a guy come to speak. He ran for public office. He didn't get in, but He came and spoke at last Saturday's rally, and he said, yeah, the enemy is, they say the enemy is the 1%. It's not. It's more like 2%, but there's also 10% who are the Praetorian Guard who work for the 2%. And so we are 88%, and the 12 is the other lot, working for the 2% or the 1%, the 11 working for the 1, because, sorry, 9 working for the 1. Yeah, it's, I've had security. What's this all about? And, about the way that we're over, you have to get back to him, blah, blah, blah. You get a passport. He goes, it's all right. I work for security with people. We've got passports already. Yeah, we don't need to get that. They've got digital. Or they delete. They won't have
You're
to get
cutting
it.
in and out on us again, Ali.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No.
My phone might be. I'm gonna have to say goodbye in a bit because it might move my phone back.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I'm sure it's hard to do have a chat in a sandwich shop anyway.
Well, of course, no one's allowed in. There are the pretty cool ladies that are in the sandwich shop. But I really enjoyed chatting to you, and I'm really sorry that I didn't manage to get home in time
Oh, it's okay.
Oh, you're fine.
phone in
Don't
on my
worry.
laptop.
You don't have to apologize for being in the street, my friend.
Yeah, no,
I could have done it with everyone there, but it was absolutely frenetic today.
Because I know that you usually are traveling home around the time we start, like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock UK time. So I actually planned on pulling you in about this time, like the start of the second hour, figuring you might be home.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why I got the time wrong. Because that's why I
it's
thought
all
I'll
right.
get on the bus and I'll get home by 7. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
No, it's all right.
You're fine.
It's fine.
We deal with
really
fucking
fine.
time zone translation issues constantly. So
Constantly.
Please don't worry. We loved having you with us, Ali.
boy.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
If you
thank
could,
you.
let people know where they
Big
can
love
find
to you guys.
and they can find the UK crew out there.
I will say hi to them. Thank you. Big love to you guys.
Yep, we love you.
Yeah.
We'll talk
Keep
to you
fighting,
soon.
guys. See ya.
We will.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye. Bye.
I love her, first of all, and second of all, I forget what I was going to say. About the time zone change. There was one week I was trying to schedule facts on the ground stuff, and I had 3 different people I was trying to schedule in 3 different time zones, like in the same week, and my brain hurt so bad. I was trying to like keep it all straight in my head, and this person would come back with like, well, I can do 3:30 your time, and then the next person would say, okay, I can do 1:30 my time, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, which time is my time and which time is your time, and who's said my time and your time. It was the worst.
It's brutal.
It is. I don't know why my brain hurts. Like, it hurts my brain. But that week was just bad. Usually it's not that bad.
No, the more I work with time zones, the more I think it's just like one of the first globalist things that got instituted, like just to divide the world so we can't keep track of what time it is in other places.
Oh, it really does hurt my brain. Like, even just dealing with one guest that's got like a time difference, it makes me like, and I'm constantly like double checking, is that right? Is that right? Is it 4 o'clock my time? Is that right? Like, I'm constantly asking people. But then to have 3 that I was trying to schedule within like a 4-day period or 5-day period, all in different time zones.
Yeah, that's
that was not fun.
But so
I'll not do that again.
We have a question in chat that said, any film and book projects underway which are utilizing the immense already compiled catalog of videos and testimonies for Julian Assange? And if so, when are their expected publications?
Nils Melzer has his book out right now, but it's only in German. It'll be out in English, I think, soon, within a few months, couple months.
Maybe June, July.
Yeah, I wanted to say June, but I might be wrong. I have a lot of dates in my head. So yeah, Nils Melzer's book is going to be, obviously, it's going to be fucking fantastic. I cannot wait to read it. I wouldn't be surprised if Kevin Gastola is working on a book. I would be very surprised if he's not. He should be if he's not. Hi, Kevin, you should work on a book. I don't know. I don't know if any
releases about WikiLeaks. Like, there's The Secret Australia that recently came out. There's Most Dangerous Man in the World, Julian Assange, that got updated for 2020 and released. But other books, absolutely, Cypherpunks, When Google Met WikiLeaks, Women of WikiLeaks, and The World According to U.S. Empire. I would say those are like the top 8. I don't know.
I also like the Why I Lost thing that they did with Hillary Clinton, and you can kind of see the emails and stuff that made an impact. That was good. I kind of hope his dad or his brother writes a book about their journey with all of this. I mean, I would definitely read it. I don't know if anybody else is writing one. I wish there were more resources. Like, I mean, I know there's a lot, but I just wish that we just had more, especially easy to digest, like hard hitting, stuff we can use to our advantage.
Do we want to talk about John Shipton's tour right now? I have an article up.
We can.
About, yeah.
I can't wait till they come to the States. I'm so excited. I want to plan events wherever, or go to events that other people plan, or whatever. Like Kentucky, I think,
right.
Maybe.
So
I can maybe make New York happen.
John Shipton marches for his son. And this is from Independent Australia. It's published today, which for them I think was yesterday. But father of incarcerated journalist Julian Assange. I have to make sure I'm unmuted before I do this. Okay. Father of incarcerated journalist Julian Assange, John Shipton, is continuing his campaign for his son's freedom, writes Dr. John Jiggins. International Press Freedom Day fell on the 3rd of May, and this year it coincided with Labor Day in Brisbane, which is in Australia. John Shipton, the father of Julian Assange, marched with Julian's union, the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, in Brisbane's Labor Day to remind Australia that his son, a famous Queensland Board journalist, whistleblower and MEAA member, was locked up in the UK on International Press Freedom Day, and his plight was being ignored by the Australian government. His supporters marched alongside him, holding a banner that read, "Home Run for Julian." They wore t-shirts that read, "He is in prison for us, we are out on the streets for him." They carried placards that read, "I am Julian Assange," said John Shipton. Julian's mistreatment is intended as an example to journalists everywhere, of the fate that befalls journalists that expose U.S. war crimes. I marched with John Shipton on Labor Day to remind journalists that we are Julian too. That afternoon, John Shipton spoke at an International Press Freedom Day rally in Bunyapa Park in the West End, with support from Senator Larissa Waters, the Australian Parliamentary Group to Bring Julian Home, Michael Cope, a Queensland Council for Civil Liberties, Paul Toner with Amnesty International, and a couple other people. I'm really bad with names, so I'm going to jump past those. But the Civil Liberties Council President Michael Cope welcomed the decision of the English court to refuse to extradite Assange, but condemned the decision not to release him. Because Senator Larissa Waters, deputy leader of the Greens in the Senate, was unable to attend due to illness, Mr. Blunting read a statement on her behalf that said Julian's father, John Shipton, urged resistance. Mr. Shipton had begun a marathon tour of the East Coast, traveling from Melbourne to Brisbane, talking first at Mardi Gras in Nimbin before traveling northward for Labor Day and the International Press Freedom Day rally in Brisbane. After Brisbane, the tour headed to Mullumbimby, Lismore, Brayan, Coffs Harbour, Bellingen, the Port, Newcastle, and Cambria. John Shipton was on a journey to everywhere to rally support for his son and to reconnect Assange supporters before embarking on an even more impressive journey to the UK and US, where he pled with President Joe Biden to ease his family's and Julian's decade-long suffering and drop the charges against Julian Assange. So, part of that home run tour, I lost Misty. Part of that home run tour is actually going to include here in the US. It's probably going to be DC. We should be able to get an event going in Columbus for him. There may be one down in Kentucky. So I'm just super excited that John Shipton's going to be coming here to the US to keep this going. Let me check to see where Misty is real quick. If you're watching, Misty, I think I'm just going to play the Niels Melzer piece in a second and close the show out with that. But let me see what else I have real quick. So this is one thing I did want to talk about with the siege of Palestine going on right now. So let me figure out where I'm at real quick, because WikiLeaks, as they have with everything, has released information about the relationship in Palestine and things that had happened there historically. So I want to talk about some of that right now. And I'll put this article in chat for everybody too once I wrap up with it. But WikiLeaks insights from the Palestine cables, and this is from 2010. Keep in mind that the Cablegate was the last major release of any type of classified information this way. So let me drop this link in here for everyone, and I also have a link to one of the cables that they mention as well. Palestine article. Cable. Cool. So one of the first things that struck me while reading the cables from the U.S. Embassy to Israel in Tel Aviv was how worried the Israeli government seemed to be about the Goldstone report into war crimes committed during Israel's 2008-9 attacks on the people of Gaza. In that cable, Tel Aviv 2777, on December 2009, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is said to have named the report as one of the three principal threats facing Israel, the other two being Iran's alleged nuclear program and missile proliferation. Second, there are important insights into the high levels of collaboration between Israeli and forces that have called themselves the Palestinian Contras while in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. Indeed, the first Cablegate headline on Palestine was sourced from cable 09TLVIV 1177, in which Israeli Defense Minister is reported to have said that he has consulted with Egypt and Fatah prior to Operation Castled, asking if they were willing to assume control of Gaza once Israel defeated Hamas. In other words, Fatah leader Mohammed Abbas, those terms as PA president, whose term expired as the PA president in 2009, knew the massive Israeli onslaught was coming, but said nothing. It was widely suspected, but to read confirmation of it from a confidential U.S. government source is something new. Palestinian authorities supporting the occupation. Daskin is also reported in 07 TLVAIV 1732 to have claimed that Sabak had a very good working relationship with the Palestinian Authority Preventative Security Organization, or the PSO, and the Global Intelligence Organization, the General Intelligence Organization. The most striking quote in the whole cable to me is this. Daskin said that the PSO shares with the ISA almost all the intelligence it collects. There is also something of an overlooked smoking gun in this cable, of Tawfik Tarwin, leader of the PSA's General Intelligence Organization. Daskin said he is trying to develop ties with the Dogma family in the Gaza Strip. The Klan, aka the Army of Islam, you may recall, are the same group that in March 2007 kidnapped BBC journalist Alan Johnston. He was rescued by Hamas in July, while a Feta connection to the group has long been suspected. To my knowledge, this is the first confirmation of it from official sources. Overall, this is a Palestinian Authority acting as nothing more than an extension of Israelis occupying forces, a relationship that has only deepened in the last 3.5 years. So just to remind everyone, this article was written in 2010, right? So intelligence services work with intelligence services, right? So I don't know. We don't have any evidence that shows anything in either direction. But if as early as what 2007 that said 2008 2009, you had the Palestinian Authority and their General Intelligence Organization working alongside of the Israeli forces, and that's just crazy. Like that's absolutely crazy to think that they're tasked with defending these people, but somehow ended up in league with the Israeli Defense Force. Um, so look at the world now. I can't make really any speculation about what's going on in regards to that, but if you just look at the way that the world's existing, has it really changed? I guess. Um, but what I'm going to do here to close out the vigil the rest of the way, since I don't think Misty's going to be able to come back in. She might be booting up her computer. But what I'm going to do, Deepa had that wonderful, wonderful whistleblower festival. So she's been putting out clips of it tirelessly. One of the clips that just recently got put out was of Neil Smelzer. So I just actually want to go through and play that. It's about an hour long. With Misty not hopping back in and with it being about 2:30, I think I'm actually going to run the whole thing and hope it works out good. So I'm going to pull that up, so bear with me for 1 minute while I get that going.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we are joined by Professor Niels Meltzer, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. Niels, we're very glad to have you at this International Festival of Whistleblowing, Dissent and Accountability, particularly given the range of work you've done around making sure that journalists, whistleblowers are not treated in a horrific way across the world. So thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to start with a fairly simple and somewhat boring question, which is, could you tell us a little bit about what a special rapporteur does and what your role is, please?
Thank you very much, Deepa, for having me. And well, I hope it's not going to be boring. I'm certainly not bored with the function, and it might sound a little bit technical, but I have been mandated by the international community, by states, by the United Nations member states, to report to states about their compliance with the prohibition of torture worldwide. So I do this by visiting countries and evaluating their prison systems, but I also intervene on behalf of individuals on a daily basis. I receive about 10 to 15 requests by individuals that are exposed to torture or are in a danger of being extradited to a country where they might be exposed to torture, or they're threatened with corporal punishment in some countries. And so they or their relatives or lawyers or NGOs can informally address my office and ask me to intervene directly with the foreign minister of that state. And I have access to all of those ministers within like 24 hours. And but I'm not employed by the United Nations, so I'm not within the hierarchical system. And I enjoy independence. I'm an independent expert appointed. It's a political appointment by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. And so that independence is obviously very important, because that allows me in a politicized organization such as the United Nations still to say what needs to be said and to speak truth to power without anyone being able to interfere with that.
I think that's something you've done admirably well, Niels. But before we go on to talk about your fantastic new book, could I ask you a couple of questions around the experiences you've had across the world, especially dealing with people who are subject to solitary confinement within the criminal justice system, and particularly whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning, about whom you, of course, wrote to the US. So could you tell us a little bit about what you see as the context within which many whistleblowers, particularly national security whistleblowers, are operating, and the kinds of treatment they're exposed to when they are exposed?
Yes, well, you see, I mean, whistleblowers really, and their name the names obviously is not, they're not called whistleblowers because they make music, but because they sound the alarm. It's an alarm whistle. It's the safety valve, basically, of society. When something's wrong in society, just like in a machine, at some point you have an alarm system, right? And that goes off because there's a problem that we can't deal with in society, and we need to inform the public to deal with it. And that's what whistleblowers do. They blow the whistle, they sound the alarm, they inform the public about misconduct, about corruption, about crimes within corporations or institutions and so on. And obviously, most participants in this festival will know better than me about this. But I think it's important to just clearly state what the function is. It's a very important societal function. These are not enemies of society. It's a bit like your immune system. If you get an inflammation, your body tells you something is wrong here. You have to take care of this. Otherwise you might die at some point. There are blood poisoning or something. So this is what whistleblowers do. They alert society and say, look, here something is wrong. It's not being addressed. If we don't, there is basically a legal black hole here where there's no accountability. And if we don't address this, if you, society, don't address this, it will fester. And it will become, it will start killing the society, destroying society from within. And so I think that's very important, that's the function that whistleblowers have. It's absolutely essential. Now, why do we need it? Essentially, in principle, we should not need them. We should have the institutions. We should have, especially the press. Even the governments should have their own reporting systems and so on. But the press is kind of a fallback position. It's the fourth estate that controls and oversees governmental powers and should inform the public, should have precisely that whistleblowing function. But very unfortunately, in the last few decades, what we've seen, especially after 9/11, you see almost like a closing of the ranks where the entire world feels somehow threatened by terrorism, and then the media, the main media organizations, close the ranks with states and basically protect states. And now I think the initial motivation might be positive because we want to support states in their fight against terrorism and so on. But the problem is that they need to maintain their independence, and when in these struggles that governments, maybe well-meant struggles against terrorism, they start leaving the rule of law and committing crimes and invading countries unlawfully and committing war crimes and using torture and clearly committing very grave crimes, it is the essential function of the media to intervene. So I know it's a very long way of answering your question, but I think this is the whole context. And so clearly in many countries, when I visit prisons or when I intervene on behalf of individuals in my current function, but even before, when I worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross for more than a decade in war areas, and I visited political prisoners in crisis areas, you see this again, it's always the same story. These whistleblowers or also journalists that then publish this information that is being leaked or given out by whistleblowers, they're being persecuted because they threaten the status quo of a power that has left the good path of good governance, right? They oppose those whistleblowers, obviously, because they don't want the alarm bell to be sounded. They want to continue in those corrupt ways. And so a lot of the political prisoners I've visited are precisely people who fall in the category of either whistleblowers or journalists or other investigative personnel of NGOs and so on, human rights defenders, essentially. It's all a bit in the same corner, right? And so that is a very, very important part of my work.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and that's one of the reasons why we've created the festival in the way we have, in that we're bringing together lawmakers, lawyers, journalists, activists, whistleblowers, and whistleblower allies, in order to kind of talk about these issues in a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary way. Coming back to this question of the persecution of truth tellers and persecution of publishers, you've written a fantastic new book about your experiences, your understanding of the case of the persecution of Julian Assange. I'd be really interested, I think our audience would be really interested to hear from you about what motivated you to write this book. Tell us a little bit about what you've written in it. And also, I'd be really grateful if you could explain one of the analogies, which I think has always stuck in my mind since I heard you first use it, which is that the elephant in the room is holding the torch. So over to you, Niels.
Yes, let me maybe start with this image of the elephant in the room. It struck me that, the elephant in the room obviously is the proverbial thing that you can't miss if you just have your eyes open, at least, And now, if you picture yourself in a dark room, there's hundreds of people, full of people, pitch dark room, and then all of a sudden a light goes on, and shines on the elephant in the room. Obviously, everybody will look at it, everybody will see it, because that's the only thing that's being highlighted by the spotlight. And that's really what Julian Assange did, right? He put the spotlight on the elephant in the room, which was the misconduct of states. He exposed serious misconduct, war crimes, torture, corruption, environmental damage, and so on. It was being caused by companies, but also mainly by governments. And so that was the elephant in the room. But that elephant had this moment. There was this moment in 2010 when basically the elephant was froze in shock and didn't know how to react. And the world started discussing all these secrets that had come out, all these war crimes, and even the mainstream press picked it up and collaborated together, with WikiLeaks to bring this to the public. And then very quickly, those states reacted, the US and its allies mainly, and snatched that spotlight from Julian Assange. So now the elephant had the spotlight, and they put it on Assange. And now, what do people do in a dark room? When the light comes on, everybody looks at that light. That's what we do in the cinema, right? No one looks at, the ceiling or the floor or the walls in the cinema. They all look at the screen. In a cinema, you could have an elephant standing there. No one would be looking at it because it's not being highlighted. And I think I use this image to illustrate how we function. It's not that we're evil, but by instinct, we all follow, the headlines. So also in the West, where we think we have, freedom of opinion, we can freely express our opinions, freely discuss anything that's in the press and so on. Yes, that's true. But do we know what is in the press and what's not in the press? What is being highlighted is in the press. These are the headlines. But there's so many things that are not being highlighted for us, and we're not even discussing them. And in the case of Julian Assange, this is something that struck me, because myself, I have been very much affected by that. I didn't know the case of Julian Assange. I wasn't really concerned with it. When I worked at the Red Cross, International Red Cross in war areas, that was in 2010 when these publications came out. I took note of that, and I was actually quite relieved that someone came out with the truth. I knew many of those things and more because I worked in this type of, in the professions where I had access to a lot of those informations, but I couldn't publish them because of the confidentiality of my work. So I was kind of relieved that this came out to the public, but it wasn't as much of a scandal to me because I knew many of those things already. So I had never had the opportunity to deal with this case. And I had just absorbed through the press all these headlines about Julian Assange being a rapist, being a traitor, being a spy, being a hacker, and so on. And I'd never really bothered. Why would I investigate it, right? So when his lawyers first contacted me in 2018, he was still in December. He was still at the embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy. They contacted me and said that his living conditions at the embassy had turned, inhumane, had become cruel, and that I should intervene on his behalf. I actually declined to get into this case. Now, I have to say that every day I have a lot of problems selecting which case I intervene for, because I receive many more requests that I can deal with. I probably can deal with 1 in 10 of the requests that I receive. So it's quite normal for me to make quick selections. But in his case, I'd had these emotions that were very negative. And you know, I thought, well, this is this hacker, this is this spy, this rapist. He just wants to manipulate me. And to my shame, I have to admit that I have been very much affected by this narrative in the press. And it's again a very long way of answering your question, but I think it's very important to say this was my starting point. And I say this because many people that maybe are watching this now, or you know, that are for the first time confronted with this case, have this same narrative inside them. And they may be convinced that they know that, you know, Julian Assange is all of these things, but they may never have asked themselves where they actually got this information from. And when I got contacted a second time by his lawyers 3 months later, just before he was expelled from the embassy, they sent me a couple of pieces of evidence and medical opinions and so on, which triggered, you know, my sense of responsibility. I felt, well, you know, if they insist, I might have to at least open some of those documents and look at them. And as soon as I did, the contradictions came to the surface. And I started realizing that this public narrative that had been spread really doesn't hold up, that there's really nothing to support it. And that triggered then my interest. So I got into this case a bit more deep. I felt I couldn't just rely on press reports or, you know, official statements by states, but I had to actually go, because it was so politicized, I had to go to Belmarsh prison. I had to visit him together with 2 specialized doctors. We had to examine him for 4 hours, and we actually did come to the conclusion that he showed all the symptoms that are typical for psychological torture. Now, at this point, I felt, all right, we're in a Western state, rule of law, Britain, you know, this will be an easy thing. I mean, I have 2 medical opinions. I've been to visit him, which is much more than I can do for many of the prisoners in the world. It's a very objective assessment. If I present my conclusions to the government, they will change their ways. They will realize that this man has been abused, and they will change the treatment, and this case will be resolved, because we're dealing with a rule of law state. And that didn't work, right? I mean, the British government, I intervened with the British government, and I intervened also with the other governments that had contributed to the ill treatment of Julian Assange, to persecution. And that was Sweden with its arbitrary proceeding against him. It was Ecuador, the way they had treated him since the change of government in 2017, and harassed him and surveilled him in the embassy. It was obviously the US in the background, and that looming espionage trial with completely disproportionate, draconian 175 years prison sentence, and you know, for publishing the truth. So while those people that have committed the war crimes that he has proven with his publications have never been even investigated, so I intervened with all these countries, and I presented the evidence, and I asked them to respond, to give me their position, and to answer precise questions. And they refused to do that. They refused to engage in a constructive dialogue. And now I'm not, you know, I'm belittling NGOs, but I mean, states don't have an obligation necessarily to respond to an NGO representative asking questions. They should, in my opinion, but they can argue, well, you know, we can't answer, you know, to everybody. But if they mandate someone like me, if states give me an official mandate to investigate cases, if the British government invites me upon my request to visit Julian Assange in the prison and to give me access to investigate this, and then they don't like the results, well, what does this say about the rule of law in this country if they then just refuse to engage with me? That really was, you know, they're always accusing Julian Assange of evading justice, but in fact, he was trying to escape injustice. And who's escaping justice are the war criminals and the torturers and those responsible for it and the states that are torturing him. And so this is really something that I very often get these types of responses in my interventions, not just for Julian Assange. But then I felt, well, then I'll follow up with this, because these Western democracies usually is what I considered my allies in my fight against torture. And it's not the usual suspects, you see. So I thought, well, if I go public with this, with a strong press statement, and I complain about their non-cooperation, and then I write follow-up letters, well, then they really don't have a choice. They will have to engage with me. And I did that. In my follow-up letters, I asked very precise questions. For example, to Sweden, I asked 50 questions about alleged violations of due process in, which is obviously a lot, 50 very uncomfortable questions, together with evidence. And I asked them, can you please explain why you did this and why you suppressed this evidence and why, we have correspondence indicating that some of the evidence has been manipulated. And can you please explain to me why you didn't question him while he was in Sweden, and the day he left Sweden, you issued an arrest warrant, all these things. And then Sweden just writes back to me, oh, we have no further observations. And 6 days later, they closed the proceeding, the investigation against him. So essentially, I got no response whatsoever to my second letter from the US, no response from the British government, although I sounded the alarm and I said that Julian Assange's life was in danger. And so after about a year of intensively trying to intervene in this case, I realized that even in mature rule of law democracies in the West, if they feel that their national security interests are at stake, human rights systems don't work anymore. The rule of law doesn't work. And that's the point where I felt I went to New York, I informed the General Assembly. I went to Geneva, I informed the Human Rights Council twice. I even tried to inform, BBC. But if I can get a strong interview with BBC, they will be able to influence the British government. BBC refused to interview me. And on this, and I actually contacted them and said, well, my findings are very troubling. My findings are that the British government is persecuting a journalist to the point where I cannot escape the conclusion that he has been tortured. And I mean, that's scandalous as a conclusion. And I'm even a professor at the British University. So if I come to this conclusion, either I'm wrong, and then you need to expose it, or I'm right, and then all the more you need to expose it. But there's no way you can say this is not relevant for the public. And that's precisely the response I got from BBC. I said, well, this is right now, we don't consider this to be newsworthy.
Well, I mean, they did the same about the Old Bailey hearings. They said it was not, essentially, to paraphrase, they said it was not exciting enough for them to report on. And this was the most important trial of a journalist and publisher in the UK. So, but could I take you a step back? Sorry,
I wanted to come back. That conclusion where I realized I can't go to the governments, I can't go to the General Assembly, I can't go to the Human Rights Council, the UN institutions. I asked for a meeting with the High Commissioner of Human Rights, who was very evasive because she knew I wanted to talk about this case. The press didn't want to report on it. Well, then I said, well, I'll have to write a book about this. I have to report to the public that this system is not working. And that's very dangerous. Yeah, because if someone like me cannot get states to at least investigate a grave crime such as torture and persecution of a journalist for telling the truth, well, then the self-healing capacities of our Western democracies are not as good as we might think.
Could I take a step back before we go into the details of your book and how the persecution played out, to ask why you think psychological torture is on a par with other forms of torture that people experience, and particularly in this case, what you saw as the factors that were leading to the psychological torture?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, we have to realize that all torture essentially, ultimately, is a psychological process. Even when you use physical pain, in the end, you want to affect the mind of the victim. That's what torture wants. Torture is really the infliction of severe pain or suffering, physical or mental, in order to achieve a purpose, which can be interrogation, or it can be, forcing a confession, a statement, or suppressing a statement. It can be, coercion. It can be intimidation, punishment, discrimination. But it's always this intentional and purposeful infliction of pain or suffering. Now, but in the end, because you want to achieve some form of a reaction, you have to mentally affect the person. So really, the most direct way of torturing someone is to go through the mind. If you inflict physical pain, it's just because the person can't stand the pain. It will break their will. But now, since we have a universal prohibition of torture, and we have specialized medical personnel who can easily distinguish traces of torture from other injuries and medical symptoms, states have developed in the last months, and it directly attacks the identity and perceptions of a person by depriving them of the normal environment, sensory deprivation, isolation, social isolation, physical isolation. Then there's a threat scenario. The most primitive form of psychological torture is threatening someone, causing anxiety. And then you're confusing the person by changing the rules all the time. The law doesn't apply to you; it applies to everybody else, but not to you. Your rights to prepare your defense, to have access to lawyers that you think are normal rights that you can invoke, they're not being respected. All these little things in the daily routine that we rely on, that give us stability in society, they're being intentionally destabilized. And it doesn't sound horrible, but it actually is. You can destabilize, and it has been experimented with in medical programs and so on with volunteers to see how sensory deprivation functions, or isolation, or humiliation and so on. And it really erodes the personality and creates kind of a permanent state of anxiety, kind of a permanent panic mode. And that even destroys the nervous system in the long run. And when we visited Julian Assange, we could already measure some of these impairments. The neurological and cognitive ones were measurable already. So it really is a very grave form of torture. And perhaps it can be compared to a situation of mobbing, because I'm saying that because many people will be able to relate to that. Mobbing is extremely destructive. We know that, even in a small context, just as a school class, or the workplace, or an army unit. If you have the whole collective turning against an individual, even without using physical violence, they can push them to the point of committing suicide. And I mean, we know that there's plenty of studies and plenty of people hearing that will have experienced that, or seen people in their environment experiencing that. And so here we have kind of an organized, state-sponsored mobbing process that has been extended over a decade now. And to me, it is a miracle that Julian Assange is still alive.
On that note, one of the things that, apologize for the aeroplane flying over, but one of the things that has always struck me as quite interesting is what Julian did was to help prevent whistleblowers getting tortured. And I again want to take a slight segue to ask you about your impressions of how Chelsea Manning was tortured, because clearly the idea behind WikiLeaks was to ensure that whistleblowers were anonymous so that they weren't exposed to this form of harassment, intimidation, mobbing, torture. and essentially their lives being destroyed because they could no longer find a job in the same environment, etc., etc. Could you tell us a little bit about what kinds of treatment is used against whistleblowers? And then maybe after that, we can talk a little bit more about Julian's case.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the most effective method that is used against whistleblowers really is fear, causing fear, intimidating them, and that's being done by setting examples, by taking Chelsea Manning and sentencing her to 35 years in prison for complete nonviolence. I mean, she didn't hurt anybody. I mean, she disclosed evidence for crimes because she couldn't, pass through the internal systems, because there was impunity for massacres, that occurred on a daily basis. So by imposing these kind of draconian punishments on whistleblowers, and at the same time ensuring that none of these publications will lead to prosecutions of the real culprits, those that committed those crimes that have been exposed. So there's two messages here to the whistleblowers. It says, what you're doing is useless because there will be no consequences for the perpetrators. They enjoy impunity. But for you, your life will be destroyed. And so that message, that's why we have these draconian punishments, right? It's really a deterrence. And in Chelsea Manning's case, I mean, clearly she was being detained in solitary confinement. I mean, the UN standards, the minimum standards on the treatment of prisoners make very clear that solitary confinement can only be used in very exceptional cases where it's necessary to protect the person from him or herself, suicide prevention, for example, or protect others when you have very violent, dangerous, criminals being detained. But even then, it has to be reduced to the minimum duration possible, and in no case can be used for more than 15 consecutive days. And Julian Assange has been in Belmarsh prison for 2 years, and most of that time he's spent alone in a cell for more than 22 hours a day. So, which is called solitary confinement. So that by definition, according to the official UN standards, already amounts to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. That's Julian Assange. Chelsea Manning, it was, I don't remember, was it about 9 months that she was in solitary confinement? I don't, quote me on the precise duration, but it's several months. And even the sentencing court in the end had to acknowledge that her treatment was cruel and inhumane, and reduced her 35-year sentence by 30 days or something like this. I mean, which is a ridiculous, disproportionate measure, but still, formally, the court had to recognize that her treatment and conditions of detentions were inhumane. So that's, when we see the problem, especially in the United States, these whistleblowers are considered to be spies, to be enemies of the state, and to hold a lot of information that they should not share. So with this, they justify what's called special administrative measures. And special administrative measures is not something that's imposed by a court. The court will sentence the person to a certain, prison sentence. But the special administrative measures is something that the Attorney General can impose without judicial review. So it's the executive basically imposing those measures. And those measures mean that the person will be totally isolated, but totally. That means the person cannot speak to other inmates. The person can, not speak to anybody that's not pre-authorized by the prison authorities. They cannot even speak to prison staff. So they're totally isolated from human contact, and that erodes the person. And we know that, all of us, we need that exchange with other people. And even calls to families are limited to maybe one call every couple of weeks for 7 minutes or something like this, and only people that are on a specific list. And there was one case where someone in special administrative measures, I forgot the name of the detainee, he in a letter to a authorized contact said, please give my best regards and my love to my to his grandson, who was a year or 2 years old or something like this. And he was disciplined because his grandson of 2 years old was not on the authorized list of contacts. I mean, it's absurd. These types of arbitrary detention conditions destroy a person.
Can we now come back to the book? So it's really helpful to hear you talk about this, because we heard a lot about this during the hearings of Julian Assange, particularly in relation to US prison conditions. Could you tell us a bit about the kinds of circumstances that have now led to a situation where he is in virtual solitary confinement, and particularly in relation to the Swedish case, where no charges were ever raised and it was always kept at a preliminary investigation stage? Surely aren't the government and the prosecution required to bring a case to some kind of conclusion and due process? Is that not what you would expect?
Well, it's not just an expectation, it's a duty. I mean, it's the due process is the bare minimum that needs to be afforded to anybody. I mean, even proven war criminals have a right to due process, right? I mean, even in Nuremberg, you know, the main responsibles of the Second World War were tried in due process. So, I mean, that's the bottom line. If you can't afford due process, you're no longer a rule of law society. I mean, then we're just in tyranny. And unfortunately, that's precisely what we see in these trials, you know, against people that are considered enemies of the state. So, you know, if the test for a democracy is not whether they proceed according to due process in a standard everyday divorce case or something like this. The test is how do they treat the people they consider their enemies, you know, rightly or wrongly, but how do they deal with them? And that's precisely what we see here in this case. I mean, the Swedish case is an absolutely grotesque example of judicial malpractice, where we see that the authorities, you know, that there was some incident that happened between these women and Julian Assange, and you know, only those involved will ever know what really happened, because there is no evidence, and there wasn't from the beginning. And now we can be, we can deplore that, but that's just the reality, you know, that we will never be able to find out what exactly happened. But what we do know, and what I can prove, and what I also prove step by step in that book, is that the Swedish authorities were never interested in finding out. They wanted to take this case to immediately undermine the credibility of Julian Assange, and they misused those women, and they misused, obviously, also Julian Assange in order to achieve that purpose. And we can see that how they procrastinated those proceedings, while at the same time convincing the public that it was Julian Assange's fault. It was always him who tried to evade justice. It was him who was hiding in the embassy because he didn't want to face justice in Sweden. But in fact, he has offered repeatedly to Sweden that he'll come to Sweden if only they guarantee he will not be extradited to the US. And mind you, now in January, the magistrates courts decided they can't extradite Julian Assange to the US because the detention conditions would be inhumane. Now, well, that's what Julian Assange has been saying all along. He has been saying, well, I'm coming to Sweden, I'm facing all those charges, those allegations, as you rightly said, there were never even charges. I'll face those allegations, but I don't want to be extradited to the US because there I will be subjected to inhumane treatment. That's what the British court just confirmed. So actually, the judge in January confirmed that Julian Assange has been right all along. He was right to seek asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, that Ecuador was right to give him asylum from extradition to the US, that Sweden was wrong in not guaranteeing that non-extradition, that the UK was wrong in not guaranteeing that non-extradition. So he was right. He was not paranoid. He was absolutely right. And so this is precisely this arbitrariness that that marks this case on every single step. That you see the Swedish authorities claiming that, you know, Julian Assange is evading justice, and that he is preventing justice for those women. But in fact, Julian Assange offered, when those allegations first came out in Sweden, they were illegally leaked to the press, you know, the same day that the women showed up at the police station, and they didn't show up to report a crime, but they showed up because they wanted him to take an HIV test. And so it was the police that immediately said, this is rape, and, you know, pushed it to the press illegally under Swedish law. And from the next day on, it was all about, you know, rape allegations. And Julian Assange then extended his stay in Sweden voluntarily for 5 weeks. He didn't run away. He was supposed to leave 5 days later, but he said, no, I'm going to stay. I want to clarify these things. So he stayed in Sweden. He took a lawyer. He extended his stay for more than a month, and he offered, you know, his participation, his testimony. And so he was questioned a few days later by the police about these allegations, and he offered to come back and, you know, to speak. He was questioned about one case, and he said, well, I'm happy to speak about the other case as well. And the police didn't want to speak about the other case at that point and sent him home or wherever he stayed. And he offered to come back to speak about the other case. And the prosecutor, because they had heard him and they knew that they will not be able to prove those allegations, which means that if he comes back for another questioning, they will then have to close the case for lack of evidence. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to maintain the case. And so they avoided questioning him, saying, oh, we can't question you right now. The police officer is sick. And now we first have to question some other witnesses. And there were no witnesses. There was just the women and him. What witnesses? I mean, who do you want to question about an event where they were not there? So, and again, I also have to remind everybody that the facts that were being claimed here, any prosecutor would know that you can't prove that. Because in one case, it was claimed that Julian Assange intentionally ripped a condom. Now we all know that condoms can you know, accidentally be destroyed, and so there's no way you can forensically prove that it's destroyed, but you can't prove whether it was intentional or not. And that's just, if he doesn't acknowledge, yes, I did it intentionally, and if he doesn't have a criminal record that he's done this 50 times before, and he doesn't have that criminal record, then in the end it will simply be a acquittal, you know, because of the benefit of the doubt. And you know, you can agree with that or not, but that's just the way it is in a rule of law society, right? In case of doubt, the accused gets the benefit. And so the Swedish knew that, and they didn't want to get to that stage, so they didn't question him anymore. And in the other case, it was about you know, the question whether the woman that he had already had intercourse with several times during the night protected, whether he had initiated an intercourse the next morning while she was still sleeping, or whether she was already awake. Again, there's no way forensically to prove what's the truth. Was she asleep? Or there's even, honestly, it's even possible that he thought she was awake and she was actually asleep. And, you know, they just didn't, there was a misunderstanding. That's possible too. But what I'm saying, it's not my job to find out what happened, but what my job is to say, in these circumstances, any prosecutor will have to dismiss the case because there's no way of proving that. And what we can see is from the point when they first questioned Julian Assange, they realized we will not be able to prove this. So from now on, we won't question him as long as he's in Sweden. And his lawyer actually comes back to the prosecutor and says, well, when will you question him? He will have to leave at some point. You know, he's not living in Sweden. He's still staying here. He's waiting. And she's procrastinating, the prosecutor is. And then at some point, the lawyer asks, well, can he leave? He has to leave the country and he can come back for the questioning. And then she says, yes, he can leave. And so when he leaves, that day they issue an arrest warrant claiming that he wanted to evade justice, right? So you can see, and that continues. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but in the book, we have a very clear, a chronological account of what actually happened, and with the evidence, text messages that I got access to, and email correspondences and so on that prove that. And so what we see is that this proceeding was convenient for the Swedish authorities and their allies, the US and the UK, because what we can see, we have also email correspondence between the British authorities and the Swedish authorities, where the British are discouraging the Swedish from closing that proceeding. They're saying, don't you dare, that's a quote, it's a direct quote, don't you dare get cold feet. Don't close that proceeding, maintain it. Why would the British be interested in that? I mean, the women were Swedish, the allegations were, the incident was supposed to have happened in Sweden. There was no British aspect to this. But the British then surveilled the embassy of Ecuador for 6.5 years, 24/7, for £16 million, because the person sitting inside, who has received official asylum by a UN member state, is wanted not for a crime, but just because the Swedes want to question him. Because they didn't charge him, they just want to question him. And he said, well, why don't you question me by phone or by video link, or because there's a mutual legal assistance agreement that allows that. And it has been done in dozens of other cases. Or why don't you just come to London to question me? And the prosecutor always says, oh, no, we can't do that. You need to be present in Sweden to be questioned. And then he says, okay, I'm coming. Just give me a guarantee. Obviously, the US has nothing to do with it, so you can easily guarantee you won't send me to the US after that, right? Because, remember, Sweden has a history of handing people over to the CIA without any proceeding. They have done that. The Agiza case, the Alzeri case, and were condemned for it by the United Nations. So he was right to ask for that guarantee, and I can assert that this is usual practice. Governments do give these types of guarantees, diplomatic assurances, and Sweden always refused. So he was right to stay in that embassy, as even the British judge implicitly confirmed. So, I mean, we could go on and on, but then in all of these jurisdictions, you can see that, the extradition trial when Sweden wanted to extradite him to Sweden from the UK. There's many irregularities in that trial, where in the end, the Supreme Court of the UK applies, in order to be able to extradite him, because they couldn't otherwise, they had to apply, instead of the British Extradition Act, they had to apply a EU directive, but the French version of it, because only in French could you kind of twist the interpretation to allow that extradition. I mean, it's all explained in the book. I'm not going to bore you with the details. I mean, absurd things. Or you can see it now, the British proceedings from day one, when he was arrested in the embassy and pulled out. He was pulled in front of a criminal judge, not to determine, the justification for his preliminary arrest, but to actually convict him of a crime, the bail violation, which is the only crime they have ever been able to prove, and which is not really a crime because he had a justification, asylum. But so they convicted him within 15 minutes. Have you ever heard of a criminal trial taking 15 minutes and him not being able to prepare that trial? I mean, this is step by step by step. In every step, in every stage of every proceeding, in every jurisdiction, his procedural rights are being severely violated. He's being expelled by Ecuador. He's an Ecuadorian citizen. He has official asylum. And both of these status situations are being withdrawn from him without any advance notice. I mean, yes, you can withdraw asylum status. Yes, you can potentially even withdraw nationality if you have a double citizen. But it's a rule of law proceeding. If you want to do that, you announce it, and then you give the person time to prepare and to defend and take a lawyer and respond. But it's not President Moreno waking up one morning and giving a call to his ambassador in London. Hey, today you withdraw asylum and nationality from our citizen in our embassy. That's not how it works. But yes, it does in Assange's case. That's just systematic, you see, and it continues to this day.
Can I just so Fidel Narvaez will be also at the festival, and he's going to talk about this deprivation of citizenship and how it's illegal in Ecuador, or rather a rather inaccurate way of doing it. But I'd like to come back to this question of arbitrariness and talk to you a little bit about the hearings that took place more recently at the Old Bailey, and also the verdict and the decision not to grant bail, and talk to you about the consequences of that decision and the verdict. I know you've spoken at length about this. If you could give us a little summary of where the state of play is now. And of course, we are waiting very eagerly for the English version of your book. The German version, of course, some of us and our colleagues are able to read, but we're also waiting for the English version, which will be due in January. And many congratulations for bringing that out and having the courage to see it through. But if you could tell us a little bit about the current proceedings and what the prognosis is for the future.
Yes, I mean, obviously the proceedings themselves have been riddled with due process violations in terms of witnesses being excluded, and the U.S. being allowed to change their indictment, after all the evidence had already been submitted. All of a sudden they come up with a new indictment, and the defense is not allowed to bring evidence against it. I mean, it's atrocious. Honestly, it's not irregularities. That's not a trial. It's a show trial. I mean, that's what it is. But okay, I'm not going to go into the details because it'll take us 3 hours to go through this. But it's just riddled with due process violations, to the point where the whole proceeding really is just, you can't even repair that anymore. You see. And just not even to speak that obviously the U.S. side has, gathered evidence in an illegal manner. For years, surveilled him in the embassy. His privacy has been violated. The private use of his documents have been violated. Ecuador has just given all of his belongings, handed over to the U.S. I mean, there's no legal basis for this type of stuff. But anyway, and it affects obviously the fairness of the proceeding. But wrapping it up, we have this decision in January by the court, where we can see how the judge goes through the indictment and the extradition request rather, and confirms the entire rationale of the U.S. indictment, which means that Julian Assange being accused of espionage for obtaining and publishing true information of public interest, which is the very core of press freedom. I mean, that's what it's about. Press freedom is not to entertain people, it's to empower people. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's being used as entertainment, give bread and games to the people, right? I mean, that's what the Roman emperors did, entertain people so they're not asking uncomfortable questions. And obviously those in power would like it to be that way. But the function of the free press, and it's the fourth estate because it's supposed to empower us. So, okay, all of this is being confirmed, which means that the British court says it's admissible, this indictment. It's not, first of all, they said it's not a political offense, when espionage is, the prime example in any law school of a political offense. What's a political offense? Oh, espionage, obviously. So all of a sudden, it's no longer a political offense. And although the treaty between the UK and the US prohibits extraditions for political offenses, they say, well, and that prohibition, by the way, doesn't apply here. And they have a very, juridical acrobatics to come to that conclusion. It's absurd. It really is absurd for a lawyer to listen to that. And then, they're not. They basically, the judge refuses the press freedom protection for what Julian Assange has done. Says he's not a journalist, and it has nothing to do with. It's not protected by press freedom. So essentially, he's extraditable, and what he's done is punishable not only under the Espionage Act in the US, but also under the Official Secrets in the UK. So now we also have the UK and the whole Commonwealth that is inspired by the UK, that is affected by that legal precedent was set by that court. And the judge now, in the end, surprisingly to many, said all of a sudden, yes, but we won't extradite him for medical reasons, because he is so mentally ill that he will not be able to face the harsh conditions of detentions in the US, and he would very likely commit suicide. Now, this was at first celebrated by many as a victory for Julian Assange and for press freedom and so on. Now, remember, we just have the first legal precedents saying that investigative journalism is a crime. But telling the truth is now a crime in the UK if the appeals court doesn't change that ruling. And it's in the UK, and it's preparing it also for the US, which is extremely dangerous. So it's by no means, it's a defeat for press freedom. And it's a shame to see that established media, including BBC and others, have not, protested against this. They're basically signing their own death warrant with this, right? So they're becoming basically a spokesperson or a public relations department of the government, because
Assuming
they're no
they're
longer
not that already.
Yes, exactly. But anyway, so but why did the judge? And that's but the question I ask myself: why did the judge refuse his extradition? Well, it's certainly not for humanitarian reasons. It's because it reduces, it turns in the mechanics of the legal proceeding. This is the first instance. We know that there will be a second instance, right? Whoever wins or whoever loses on the first instance will appeal to the appeals court. Now, if Julian Assange's lawyers appeal because he's being extradited by the first instance, they will appeal all of those arguments. They will say, there's press freedom, it's a political offense, it's espionage, all of these things. Human rights violations, torture, all of these things. So the appeals court will have to deal with that. Now, because he's not being extradited, we also have an appeal, but by the US. And the US only appeals one question. They say, no, our prison conditions are okay. And if you're in doubt, here are our assurances. We can give you diplomatic assurances that we will treat him well, that we will give him access to a doctor for the rest of his life in solitary confinement, right? And now that means that the appeals court will only have to deal with that. And the US can give these assurances, and therefore the appeals court can quite easily come to the conclusion that the US has, to their satisfaction, addressed the concerns of the first instance, and therefore he can now be extradited. That's one scenario that's possible. Now, hopefully, the legal team of Assange will also cross-appeal or be allowed to cross-appeal, which is not guaranteed in the UK. And so they can bring some of those questions to the fore also in the appeal stage. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that the appeals court will say, oh, we'll look at the first instance proceeding. There were too many violations or irregularities, that superseding indictment came in too late and so on. So we'll send it all back to the first instance. So let them do it again. Now, that is not a victory either, because it means another 2 years in the first instance until we're at square one again, and then it comes to the appeals. So that's kind of the ping pong game where we just keep the proceeding, we're perpetuating it, punishing Julian Assange by process and killing him by process. Because, and that's the other question you raised, he's not being released on bail. And that's a huge difference. If he had been released on bail, well then, okay, then you can proceed as long as you want, but he can live his normal life. He can have a profession. He can have his family life. He can be rehabilitated. He can regain his health. But that's precisely what they don't want, right? That's why it's at the face of it, it's absolutely absurd for a judge to say it would be inhumane to extradite him to solitary confinement in the US and then to send him back to solitary confinement in the UK. I mean, Belmarsh is being described as the equivalent of a US supermax in the UK. And it's sometimes called the Guantanamo of UK. So, I mean, and for a reason. So we can see that the purpose of keeping him deprived of his liberty is not because he's serving a sentence. He is being kept only for preventative purposes to assure his presence in case he gets extradited at the end of this proceeding. But you don't need to put someone in a high security prison for that. There's no legal basis for that. The only thing you can do is put him in house arrest. That's what they did with Augusto Pinochet, who was accused of mass, crimes, torture and murder and so on. He was not sent to Belmarsh in a solitary confinement. He was being, put in house arrest in a villa in London. He got visits from the former prime minister. I don't see Julian Assange getting visits from Tony Blair, and he's not being held in a villa, but he could be. I don't think he wants any visits from Tony Blair, but he certainly deserves. And I'm not trying to ridicule this. I just want to show how absurd it is, because the only thing that could possibly be done to him legally is that he would be held in house arrest, where he can have full access to internet, exercise his profession, live his family life. He has 2 children in London. He has family members all over the world. I mean, he has a right to have a normal life. He's not a convict. He has his bail violation sentence, which was unjust, by the way, has been served. And for more than 1.5 years already, he should be out. So what I'm saying is here, I don't know which twist and which turn this proceeding will take. But if I look at the big picture, we can see the US, the UK, Sweden, Ecuador having spent, tens of millions in whatever currency to corner and persecute and silence Julian Assange. I don't think they will allow him to go free and to take up his profession again unless there is a broad change of public opinion that exposes the truth about this case, and where the people hold their governments to account.
On that note, Niels, thank you very much for your time. And for those of you watching, you may wish to look at the Stratfor leaks, which show that this was an intentional plan to keep Julian always in limbo, moving him from state to state, making him, as they said, a bride in prison and eating cat food. And so the story is unfolding just as the torturers and persecutors envisaged. But it is very important to us as activists, as people deeply interested in democracy and the rule of law, to have people like you upholding that, and very grateful for the work you do, and all power to you, Niels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to you, thank you for having me and for putting this on the agenda, because events like this are absolutely crucial. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, I just want to thank everybody for hanging out. I'm going to go ahead and watch as Rockfin counts down and then wrap it up. But yeah, that was a wonderful interview by Niels Melzer. If you can, please share it out as much as you can to everyone. We're going to go through a lot of these whistleblowing, dissent, and accountability interviews and the whole thing that they did. We're not going to play every single one, obviously. But I just look forward to closing shows out with stuff like that. So thank you guys so much for hanging out to listen to it. As always, you can find us on Twitter at action_4Assange. Thank you very much, everyone.